Hi everyone, great to see you. Today we're continuing to look at wisdom. Specifically, we're going to look at making wise choices. You see, sometimes it's not easy to make the right choice. Sometimes we might not even know what the right choice is. And other times, even if we do know what the right thing to do is, it's not always easy. And there may be other choices that seem easier and more fun. A little while ago, we looked at the journey of a guy called Abraham and his wife, Sarah. He had a lot of choices to make, leaving his family, traveling for hundreds of miles to Haran and then Canaan. He was successful and safe where he lived in Ur. He had his family around him, and everything was good. But God spoke to him, and he chose to leave his family and follow what God was saying. It would have been very easy for him to ignore those voices in his head as dumb thoughts and for Abraham to stay where he was. Surely that would have been the sensible thing to do. But Abraham recognized God's voice. He took a risk and he followed God's path. And as a result, God promised Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation. God promised Abraham that his descendants would be more numerous than the stars. But Abraham had reached 100 years old, and his wife Sarah was 90, and they still hadn't had a child yet. But because Abraham trusted and feared God, God blessed Abraham and Sarah with a son, Isaac. Isaac was the answer to all their prayers, and surely through Isaac, God's promises would come true. But Abraham's path was not straightforward. He still had some big choices to make, maybe even the biggest choices. Some years later, God again spoke to Abraham. He said to him, "Take Isaac, your only son, the son that you love and who I gave you miraculously. Take Isaac to a place called Moriah, where you are to go up the mountain and sacrifice him as a burnt offering." This made Abraham very sad. He had a big decision to make. Was he going to follow God or go his own way? God had promised that through Isaac, Abraham's descendants would be more numerous than the stars. And if Isaac was sacrificed, how was that going to happen? And what about Sarah? How was he going to explain that? I can imagine the conversation. Can you? Oh, by the way, dear, you know our son Isaac, the son that we'd waited so long for and that God gave us as a gift? Well, you see, I've just sacrificed him as a burnt offering. I don't think that would have gone down very well. Do you? It would have been much easier just to ignore it and carry on as if nothing had happened. But true to form, Abraham trusted God. And so, with a heavy heart, he took Isaac, a sacrificial knife, some wood for the offering, and some fire, and set off on their journey. During the journey, Isaac turned to his dad and asked, "Dad, I know we have the fire, and I know we have the wood for the burnt offering, and you've got the knife, but where's the lamb for the sacrifice?" This must have been a really hard question for Abraham to answer, knowing that he was going to have to sacrifice Isaac. But he was still trusting God, and he answered, "The Lord will provide." When they got to the place God showed them, they built an altar and placed the wood on it ready for the sacrifice. Abraham took Isaac and bound him and placed him on the altar. Isaac also had a choice here, though, didn't he? Remember, Abraham was over 100 years old, well over 100 years old. Isaac was a fit young boy, probably a teenager or a young man. He could have easily run off or overpowered Abraham, but he also trusted his father and the Lord. With Isaac laying on the altar, Abraham took out his sacrificial knife. All of a sudden, an angel appeared just in time. The angel told Abraham to stop and to release Isaac. A few seconds later, and it would have been curtains for Isaac, Abraham looked up, and there he saw a ram caught in a bush, which he took and sacrificed it in Isaac's place. He called that place, "The Lord will provide." The angel confirmed to Abraham God's promises that his descendants would be more numerous than the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And later, Isaac had a son called Jacob, and Jacob had 12 sons. The families of these 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. And thus, as Israel grew, so God's promise to Abraham was fulfilled. But here's the thing. Abraham didn't do what God told him to in order to get a reward. After all, what earthly reward could possibly be worth sacrificing his son? He did it because he loved and feared God. He trusted him, even when it was really hard, and even when he couldn't see a good reason. And not following God seemed much more sensible. Can you think of any times when you followed God's path, or even when you haven't? How did it turn out? Thank you.